And just a little bit left of this, the second chapter of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It is called The Grindstone, and we cut off in the description of the Grindstone. Basically, this is the building and the taking of spoils from the guillotine, which Mr. Lorry, who is in the house that the Monsignor once lived in, really did not want Lucy and her father to see, but in order to explain what's going on with Darnay being in the force, he hides Lucy in a room and shows Dr. Manette what's going on. And I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of that long paragraph because I don't think I did it quite justice before. The grindstone had a double handle, and turning at it madly were two men whose faces, as their long hair flapped back from the when the whirlings of the grindstone brought their faces up, were more horrible and cruel than the visages of the wildest savages in their most barbarous disguise. False eyebrows and false mustaches were stuck upon them, and their hideous countenances were all bloody and sweaty, and all awry with howling, and all staring and glaring with beastly excitement and want of sleep, as these ruffians turned and turned their matted locks, now flung forward over their eyes, now flung backward over their necks. Some women held wine in their mouths that they might drink, and what with dripping blood, and what with dropping wine, and what with the steam of sparks struck out of the stone, all their wicked atmosphere seemed gore and fire. The eye could not detect one creature in the group, free from the smear of blood, shouldering one another to get next to the sharpening stone, were men stripped to the waist, with the stain all over their limbs and bodies, men in all sorts of rags, with the stain upon those rags, men devilishly set off with spoils of women's lace and silk and ribbon, with the stain dyeing those trifles through and through. Hatchets, knives, bayonets, swords, all brought to be sharpened, were all red with it. Some of the hacked swords were tied to the wrists of those who carried them, with strips of linen and fragments of dress, ligatures various in kind, but all deep of the one color. And as the frantic wielders of these weapons snatched them from the stream of sparks and tore away into the streets, the same red hue was red in their frenzied eyes, eyes which any unbrutalized beholder would have given 20 years of life to petrify with a well-directed gun. All this was seen in a moment as the vision of a drowning man, or of any human creature at any very great pass could see a world if it were there. They drew back from the window, and the doctor looked for the explanation in his friend's ashy face. "They are," Mr. Lorry whispered, the words glancing fearfully round the locked room, "murdering the prisoners. If you are sure of what you say, if you really have the power you think you have, as I believe you have, make yourself known to these devils, and get them taken to the force. It may be too late, I don't know, but let it not be a minute later." Dr. Manette pressed his hand, hastened bareheaded out of the room, and was on the courtyard when Mr. Lorry regained the blind. His streaming white hair, his remarkable face, and the imperious confidence of his manner, as he put the weapons aside like water, carried him in an instant to the heart of the concourse at the stone. For a few moments there was a pause, and a hurry, and a murmur, and the unintelligible sound of his voice, and then Mr. Lorry saw him surrounded by all, and in the midst of a line of 20 men long, all linked shoulder to shoulder, and hand to shoulder, hurried out with cries of "Live the Bastille prisoner! Help for the Bastille prisoner! Kindred in the force! Room for the Bastille prisoner in front there! Save the prisoner Evremond at La Force!" And 1,000 answering shouts. He closed the lattice again with a fluttering heart, closed the window and the curtain, hastened to Lucy and told her that her father was assisted by the people and gone in search of her husband. He found her child and Miss Pross with her, but it never occurred to him to be surprised by their appearance until a long time afterwards, when he sat watching them in such quiet as the night knew. Lucy had, by that time, fallen into a stupor on the floor at his feet, clinging to his hand. Miss Pross had laid the child down on his own bed, and her head had gradually fallen on the pillow beside her pretty charge. Oh, the long, long night with the moans of the poor wife, and oh, the long, long night with no return of her father and no tidings. Twice more in the darkness the bell at the great gate sounded, and the eruption was repeated, and the grindstone whirled and spluttered. "What is it?" cried Lucy, affrighted. "Hush! The soldiers' swords are sharpened there," said Mr. Lorry. "The place is national property now, and used as a kind of armory, my love." Twice more in all, but the last spell of work was feeble and fitful. Soon afterwards the day began to dawn, and he softly detached himself from the clasping hand and cautiously looked out again. A man so besmeared that he might have been a sorely wounded soldier creeping back to consciousness on a field of slain was rising from the pavement by the side of the grindstone, and looking about him with a vacant air. Shortly this worn-out murderer described in the imperfect light one of the carriages of Monsignor, and staggering to the gorgeous vehicle, climbed in at the door and shut himself up to take his rest on its dainty cushions. The great grindstone, earth, had turned when Mr. Lorry looked out again, and the sun was red on the courtyard. But the lesser grindstone stood alone there in the calm morning air, with a red upon it that the sun had never given and would never take away. And that's the end of chapter 2.